Okay, page 4. Preferred hunting to tilling. They crossed the mountains north of Rivendell and came down the river Horwell. In Eriador, they soon mingled with the other kinds that had preceded them. But being somewhat bolder and more adventurous, they were often found as leaders or chieftains among clans of Harfoots or Stores. Even in Bilbo's time, the strong Fiohedish strain could still be noted among the greater families, such as the Tooks and the Masters of Buckland. In the westlands of Erador, even between the Misty Mountains and the Mountains of Loon, the hobbits found both men and elves. Indeed, a remnant still dwelt there of the Dunedain, the kings of men that came over the sea out of Westernese, but they were dwindling fast, and the lands of the North Kingdom were falling far and wide into the waste. There was room and to spare for incomers, and ere long the hobbits began to settle in ordered communities. And most of their earlier settlements had long disappeared and been forgotten in Bilbo's time. But one of the first to become important still endured, though reduced in size. This was at Bree and in the Chetwood that lay round about. Now, some 40 miles east of the Shire. So it was in these early days, doubtless, that the hobbits learned their letters and began to write after the manner of the Dunedain, who had in their turn long before learned the art of from the elves. And in those days, also they forgot whatever languages they had used before, and spoke ever after the common speech, and Westron as it was named, and that was current through the lands of the kings from Arnor to Gondor, and all the coast of the sea from Falas to Alun. Now, yet they kept a few words of their own, as well as their own names of months and days, and a great store of personal names out of the past. About this time, legend among the hobbits first becomes history, with the reckoning of years, for it was in the 1600 and first year of the Third Age that the Fahrenheit brothers Marcho and Blanco set out from Bree, and having obtained permission from the High King of Fornos, they crossed the Brown River, Barandun, with a great following of hobbits. They passed over the bridge of stone bows, and that had been built in the days of power of the North Kingdom. And they took all the land beyond to dwell in, between the river and the far downs. All that was demanded of them was that they should keep the great bridge in repair, and all other bridges and roads speed the king's messengers, and acknowledge his lordship. Thus began the Shire reckoning for the year of the crossing of the Brandywine. As the hobbits turned, the name became year one of the Shire, and later dates were reckoned from it. At once the western hobbits fell in love with their new land, and they remained there and soon passed once more out of the history of men and of elves. While there still a king, they were in name his subjects, but they were in fact ruled by their own chieftains and meddled not all with events of the world outside. To the last battle at Fornos with the Witch Lord of Agmar, they sent some bowmen to the aid of the king, or so they maintained, though no tales of men recorded. But in that war the North Kingdom ended, and the hobbits took the land for their own. And they chose from their own chiefs a thing to hold the authority of the king that was gone. There for 1,000 years they were a little troubled by wars, and they prospered and multiplied after the dark plague, year SR 37, until the disaster of the long winter and the famine that followed it. So many thousands then perished, but the days of dearth, 1158 through 60, were at the time of this tale long past, and the hobbits had again become accustomed to plenty. The land, which was rich and kindly, and though it had long been deserted when they entered it, it had before been well tilled, and there the king had once had many farms, cornlands, vineyards, and woods. So 40 leagues it stretched from the far down to the Brandywine Bridge, and 50 from the northern moors to the marshes in the south. The hobbits named it the Shire, as the region of the authority of their thane, and the district of well-ordered business. And there, in that pleasant corner of the world, they plied their well-ordered business of living. And they heeded less and less the world outside, where dark things moved, until they came to think that peace and plenty were the rule in Middle Earth, and the right of all sensible folk. They forgot or ignored what they had ever known of the guardians and of the labors of those that made possible the long peace of the Shire. They were in fact sheltered, but they had ceased to remember it. At no time had hobbits of any kind been warlike, and they had never fought among themselves. In olden days they had, of course, been often obliged to fight to maintain themselves in a hard world. But in Bilbo's time, that was very ancient history. And the last battle, before this story opens, and indeed the only one that had ever been fought within the borders of the Shire, was beyond living memory. The Battle of Greensfields, SR 1147, in which Van Dobras took rooted an invasion of orcs, and even the weathers had grown milder, and the wolves that had once been ravening out of the north in bitter white winters were now only a grandfather's tale, though there was still some store of weapons in the Shire. These were used mostly as trophies, hanging above hearths and on walls, are gathered into the museum at Michael Delving, the Malcolm House. It was called for anything that hobbits had no immediate use for, but they were unwilling to throw away. They called a matham. Excuse me. Their dwellings were apt to become rather crowded with mathams, and many of the presents that passed from hand to hand were of that sort. So nonetheless, ease and peace had left this people still curiously tough. They were, if it came to it, difficult to daunt or to kill. And they were, perhaps, so unwearyingly fond of things, not least because they could, when put to it, do without them, and could survive rough handling by grief, foe, or weather in a way that astonished those who did not know them well and looked no further than their bellies and their well-fed faces. Though slow to quarrel and for sport killing nothing that lived, they were doughty at bay and at need could still handle arms. They shot well with the bow, and they were keen-eyed and sure at the mark. Not only with bows and arrows. If any hobbit stooped for a stone, it was well to get quickly under cover, as all trespassing beasts knew very well. So, let's see. All hobbits had originally lived in holes in the ground, or so they believed. And in such dwellings, they still felt most at home. But in the course of time, they have been obliged to adopt other forms of abode. Actually, in the Shire, in Bilbo's days, it was, as a rule, only the richest and the poorest hobbits that maintained the old custom. The poorest went on living in burrows of the most primitive kind, mere holes. Indeed, with only one window or none. While the well-to-do still constructed more luxurious versions of the simple dwellings of old. But suitable sites for these large and ramifying tunnels, or smials as they called them, were not everywhere to be found. And in the flats and the low-lying districts of the hobbits, as they multiplied, began to build above ground. Indeed, even in the hilly regions and the older villages, such as Hobbiton and Torboro, are in the chief township of the Shire, Michael Delving on the White Downs. There were now many houses of wood, brick, or stone. These were especially favored by millers, smiths, ropers, and cartwrights, and other of that sort, for even when they had holes to live in, hobbits had been accustomed to build sheds and woodshops. Okay, the habit of building farmhouses and barns was said to have begun among the inhabitants of the Marish, down by the Brandywine, heavy-legged and wait a minute, by the Brandywine. Yeah, the hobbits of that quarter, the East Farthing, were rather large and heavy-legged, and they wore dwarf boots in muddy weather. But they were known to be stores in a large part of their blood, and indeed was shown by the down that many grew on their chins. No Harfoot or Firehide had any trace of a beard. Indeed, the folk of the Marish and for most part of the part ladder into the Shire from southward way, and they still had many peculiar names and strange words that not found elsewhere in the Shire. It is probable that the craft of building, as many crafts aside, was derived from the Dunedain, but the hobbits may have learned it direct from the elves and teachers of men in their youth. For the elves of the High Kindred had not yet forsaken Middle Earth, and they dwelt still at that time at the Grey Havens away from the west, and in other places within reach of the Shire. 3 elf towers of immoral age were still to be seen on the tower hills beyond western marshes. They shone far in the moonlight. The tallest was farthest away, standing alone upon a green mound. The hobbits of the West Farthing said that one could see the sea from the top of that tower, but no hobbit could ever been to climb it. Indeed, few hobbits had ever seen or sailed upon the sea, and few still had ever returned to report it. So most hobbits regarded even rivers and small boats with deep misgivings. And not many of them could swim. And as the days of the Shire lengthened, they spoke less and less with the elves, and grew afraid of them, and distrustful of those that had dealings with them. And the sea became a word of fear among them, and a token of death, and they turned their faces away from the hills in the west. The craft of building may have come from elves or men, but the hobbits used it in their own fashion. They did not go in for towers. Their houses were usually long, low, and comfortable. The oldest kind were indeed no more than built imitations of smills, thatched with dry grass or straw, are roofed with turfs, and having walls somewhat bulged. That stage, however, belonged to the early days of the Shire, and the hobbit building had long since been altered, improved by devices learned from dwarves, are discovered by themselves. A preference for round windows or even round doors was the chief remaining peculiarity of Hobbit architecture. The houses and the homes of Shire hobbits were often large and inhabited by large families. Bilbo and Frodo Baggins were as bachelors very exceptional, as they were also in other ways, such as their friendship with the elves. Sometimes, as in the case of the Tooks of Great Smells, are the Brandy Bucks, are Brandy Hall, excuse me. Many generations of relatives lived in comparative peace together in one ancestral and many tunnel mansion. All hobbits were, in any case, clannish and reckoned up their relationships with great care. They drew long and elaborate family trees with innumerable branches. In dealing with hobbits, it is important to remember who was related to whom and in what degree. So it would be impossible in this book to set out a family tree that included even the more important members of the more important families at the time in which these tales tell of. The genealogical trees at the end of the Red Book of Westmarch are a small book in themselves, and all but hobbits would find them exceedingly dull. Hobbits delighted in such things if they were accurate. They liked to have books filled with things that already knew, set out fair and square with no contradictions. So, number 2, concerning pipe weed. There is another astonishing thing about hobbits of old that must be mentioned. An astonishing habit they imbibed or inhaled through pipes of clay or wood. The smoke of the burning leaves of herb, which they called pipeweed, or leaf, or probably of nicotiana, nicotine, a great deal of mystery surrounds the origin of this peculiar custom, or art as the hobbits prefer to call it. All that could be discovered about it in antiquity was put together by Meriadoc Brandybuck, later Master of Buckland. And since he and the tobacco of the South farthing play a part in the history that follows, his remarks in the introduction to his herb lore of the Shire may be quoted. This, he says, is the one art that we can certainly claim to be our own invention. So when hobbits first began to smoke is not known. All the legends and family histories take it for granted. For ages in the Shire, smoked various herbs, some fouler, some sweeter. But all accounts agree that Tobold Hornblower of Longbottom in the South Farthing first grew the true pipeweed in his gardens in the days of Instagram II. About the year 1070 of Shire reckoning. The best homegrown still comes from that district, especially the varieties now known as Long Bottom Leaf, Old Toby, and Southern Star. Isn't that interesting? So, how old Toby came by the plant is not recorded for to his dying day. He would not tell. He knew much about herbs, but he was no traveler. It is said that in his youth he went often to Bree, though he certainly never went farther from the Shire than that. It is thus quite possible that he learned of this plant in Bree, where now, at any rate, it grows well on the south slopes of the hill, and the Bree hobbits claim to have been the first actual smokers of the pipeweed. They claim, of course, to have done everything before the people of the Shire, whom they refer to as colonists. But in this case, their claim is, I think, likely to be true, and certainly it was from Bree that in the art of smoking, the genuine weed spread in the recent centuries among dwarves and such other folk, rangers, wizards, and wanderers, and as still passed to and fro through that ancient road meeting. The home and century of the art is thus to be found in the old inn of Bree, the prancing pony that has been kept by the family of Burr from time beyond record. So, all the same observations that I have made on my own many journeys south have convinced me that the weed itself is not native to our parts of the world, but came northward from the lower Anduin. Yep, whether it was, I suspect, originally brought over the sea by the men of Windsor. It grows abundantly in Gondor, and there is richer and larger than in the north, where it is never found wild and flourishes only in warm sheltered spaces like Longbottom, and the men of Gondor call it sweet Galenus, and esteem it only for the fragrance of its flowers. From that land, it must have been carried up the Greenway during the long centuries between the coming of Elendil and our own days. But even Duodain of Gondor allows us this credit. Hobbits first put it into pipes. Not even the wizards first thought of that before we did. The one wizard that I knew took up the art long ago and became as skillful in it as in other things that he put his mind to. Number 3, of the ordering of the Shire. The Shire was divided into 4 quarters. The farthings already refer to north, south, east, and west, and these again each into a number of folklands which still bore the names of some of the old leading families, although by the time of this history these names were no longer found only in their proper folklands. Nearly all still lived in Took land, but that was not true of many families, such as the Bagginesses or the Bofins. Outside of the farthings were the east and west marshes, the Buckland. And West March added to the Shire in SR 1452.